Welcome to Carolina Sculpture Studio. My name is Clint Button, and I'm a granite sculptor. And welcome to video number 105 of the virtual stone carving apprenticeship. I want to do one more theory video, discussion video, whatever, before I get back into cutting this, to talk about some of the errors that you'll experience. And I think I've figured out a better way to do a visual. I'm not smart enough to do a computer animation. I'm sure I could figure it out if I spend enough time, but there's other things that got to be done. And so I did some thinking, and I think I figured out something that I hope will show y'all something to consider and help you, ideally help you understand what I'm thinking about as I approach establishing foundation points and shooting points, and how the placement of your foundation points really matters. So we're going to work just on the face of this big die. Well, I've got a nice flat face. It's easy to see. And I'm just going to do some arbitrary placements. We're not worried as much about, we'll say this is a line here that we can use to represent some of it. So let me show you what I'm thinking. If you have a point, and just say we've got a foundation point right here, got a mark right here. When we put we cut a little dip right there, a little hole in the stone. And then we can take our compass, and wherever we measure from that point is a radius, okay? This disc with the center placed right there represents a radius, okay? This actually is a two-dimensional representation of a sphere, because we're not going to just be working on a flat surface. We're going to be going either above or below the surface, depending on the elevation of our foundation point versus our target point. Okay, does that make sense? So this circle would be, half of this circle we could put on top here, and it would, make sense like a sphere. We're going to do that. We're going to pretend that this is our radius. Now, when you're working, I mentioned about having your foundation point and your job point, your target point, being divergent from between 2 points that you're shooting towards. And this is why. Let's just say we've got another point that we're shooting, and it's over here. And this is sort of tail wagging the dog going backwards. But see, we got another point that's right there. And so when we put this other compass on it, and our target point is down here, this is how they come together. They come together kind of fast, and then when they get close, they approach really quickly, and then they just barely kiss, and then they move apart. I'm going to grab the camera. I want you to see this up close. This is the problem that you run into if you've got your foundation point and a foundation point that you're measuring from, and a target point that are all three in the same plane at the same elevation. Can you tell where they hit? Where they actually meet? Because once they get past right here and they go to right here, it's almost impossible to see the difference. Even if we get really close, they just barely kiss. And so this is really a problem, especially if your radii are similar. If you don't have a big difference, just say, for instance, that this point over here was closer. Watch this. We use a smaller circle to represent that. See how they come together a lot faster? But then you still have a relatively difficult area to evaluate because they come together so closely. Okay? So what works better is if these points are on these are always going to represent a plane, okay? Because there's 2 points represent a line, okay? And that line can represent a plane, all right? Or line segment, whatever you want to call it. What will work better, and we're just going to slide this up just for the sake of this discussion, is if one of them, say our target point is right here. And we've got these obviously are where they are. Let's say our other job point is just down in here somewhere, okay? So we're going to put our point there. We swing our compass, and we swing our compass. Can you see how the relationship of those two, they come together, and they've got a perfectly succinct intersection. This is what we want. This is what we want to do. We want to have points that are at a different, they're in different plane with this, and hopefully there's going to be one that's longer, like this, one that's shorter. We're going to know that this point is not going to travel laterally like this one is. See how quick this sinks as your compass is coming down? This is the kind of thing we want to set up. Now, if we were not as far apart, just say it was like this, we could have it come down and cross, and if you're not paying attention, you're close, and then you go, and you dig, and now you're here, and they kind of go parallel. Well, you went too far, and you're going to dig until they cross again, and then that's a problem. Now, if your point is down in a hole, like down in some deep detail, and both of your foundation points are above it, that's what you're going to do. And if you stop here, you're at the wrong point. So you've got to be able to think about your project in a larger scale. So let me hang this back up to see if I can keep making sense. Okay, so this is all relevant because we're going to be pointing, we'll have 2 foundation points down here on the plinth, okay? And we're going to be swinging up into the interior of the stone, because right now, this is her feet, this is her legs, okay? So we're going to be pointing up. We'll have 2 foundation points down here. We'll probably put a center line on here and go up and then put a point at the top of the stone in a easy to measure position, okay? Because we can go up the center line, put a center line on the model, mark it over, go 90 degrees, go straight up, and then go down in 8 inches or 10 inches or whatever we decide to do, and have a permanent mark there. Then this point when we swing, and that point when we swing, will be at different elevations. This one will be sinking a little bit, and that one will still be above because of where it is. And that's going to give us a very good relationship between the 2 points, even though they're going to be, if they're in the middle, they'll be similar, but we'll have one that's above and one that's below. So this will come together. This is going to be, really close to where it is, or a little bit deep. This is going to be above. This corresponds to a point here, and this corresponds to a point at the head. See if we turn it just so it doesn't. I don't want to confuse it all. So it'll be like this. See how fast those come together and how succinctly they cross and intersect? That's what we want to produce. This is why it's really important as we're laying out points. And if you need to figure this and play with this, just get 2 or 3 circles of paper and see how by placing them in different positions, how they approach each other. Because what you want to avoid is this perfectly even, where they're right in a straight line from each other. See that? That's right there on the money, straight line from each other. How they meet, because you've got so much vague area. Looking at this, there's 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch in front of it, and that there's going to be that same amount behind it. So we've got an inch where there's very little movement, and it's really hard to evaluate that. So what we want to do is have 3 points, okay? We want to have a point from, and this is when you see the old guys and they're using 2 compasses. They're coming in with 2 compasses. And if you can do it that way, but by having a 3rd compass, you add a 3rd. Just say, for instance, this is how they're going to meet. We're swinging in here. We're swinging in here. And we've got a 3rd compass to do that. Now we've got an absolute way to tie that into a great place, because these 3 lines will intersect. Let me pull the camera off and show you this. Now, this is a good intersection right here. Adding a 3rd compass in there makes it very, very easy to find. You still have to be careful, and you still have to understand the relationship of how these come together, because what they're going to do is they're going to approach in a certain relationship, and as you get closer and closer and they move in, when you mark it to check it, they're going to come in and they're going to eventually match. The danger is, if you go too far, is they're going to begin to migrate apart, and that's when you really got to stop and evaluate where you are. Okay, but we want this to be able to have a very, very well-defined intersection like that. Okay, now about marking the stone. How do we do that? Let me show you. Okay, in the previous videos, I talked about how you take your compass and you strike a line. Okay, on the old videos, the old men over in Italy and stuff, and they lay their compass out, they triangle out on a piece of marble, and then they could take and literally strike a line, scratch a line in the marble with the compass, because marble's soft. You can carve marble almost with a pocket knife. You know, it's really soft depending on what it is. It's nothing like granite, absolutely not. So you have to keep your points sharp, you know, on your compasses. You don't put them on the grindstone and work them. You just have to keep them filed or sharpened with a sharpening stone. But they have to stay like so sharp that if you drop them on your foot, it'll stab you through your shoe and stick in your foot. They need to be that sharp, okay? Because if they're dull, you're going to get a vague reference, vague information. They're not going to seat well. You put them at a point. But we can't do granite and strike a line in it to read it, to get our swipe and our swipe and our swipe. We can't do that. We can't put a pencil on there, because the pencil will shorten up and you won't get an accurate reading. And we can't do this with the compass, because the compass won't mark it. Well, the old way to do it, remember when we were casting models, and they said, yeah, you can keep some of this. I'll show you how to use it when we start pointing. You keep your waste mold pieces. You can keep some of them, and this goes back to being cheap. You know, there's no reason to buy something and then use it and throw it away when you can still use it. The way the old men would do it in Barry is they would draw on the stone with their used plaster, and then you could strike through it and read it. Well, that works, but your plaster needs to be really dry so it's not gummy, and you've got all these odd pieces of plaster laying around. The problem with this is that if you put this on your stone it doesn't necessarily clean right off, because I can feel the difference between here and here in that stone. And you start having to scrub it off and do all this other stuff, and you multiply that times checking the point 5 or 6 times as you're shooting it, and you know you're adding a minute or 2 minutes to every point, and you multiply that times, say you're gonna actually do this exercise, say you're gonna do it 500 times. If you're gonna add 500 minutes, that's a bunch of time. Andy showed me what he figured out. He does the same thing. This old cup's busted, the top broke off because it's so old. I gotta get another one. This is just a chalk line bottle. Okay, you can use it like a ketchup bottle or whatever. And the only thing it's got in it is some plain old loose plaster that hasn't been wet yet. So when you get your area that you're carving away and you're shooting the points in this area somewhere, you just take it, put some plaster on there. And usually it'll pack down pretty tight because the stone's going to be all rough. Then you can swipe, and swipe to read it. And if you pack it really tight, you see this plaster is old. This plaster's been in there forever. If you feel plaster and it has any grit in it, it's junk. It's already activated, it's already gone off. And it's already dried up. It won't hydrate because it's already been activated. And so this is really old plaster that's been sitting open for a long time. I'll get a little bit of fresh plaster and it'll pack and hold its shape really well. But this, you can feel the grit in it. It's junk. Whenever you open a bag of plaster, you should be able to feel it with your hands, and it should feel cool to the touch, and it should feel completely smooth. If there's any grit in it, like there's a few little pieces that feels like sand in there, throw the bag away. It's junk. You can't do anything with it. It's just junk. Throw it away. But you'll end up having your plaster when you stripes, where you can strike your marks to see it. And then when you're done, it just wipes away and goes right up the suction. And you don't have to fool with it. So fresh plaster and a little, and this has a top on it that broke off because it's, like I said, this is ancient. I've had this forever. You just have a hole cut in your lid, and you can put it right there and just do a little squirt and pack it with your finger, swipe it, strike it, and then wipe it off so you can carve it, because you want to carve it in control. You don't want to just say, oh, I'll cut that off, and you lean in there and push it, and you push it too hard and you go past the point, because you may be really close. You may only want to just barely touch it, barely axe it. But you can save your old plaster from your waste molds, broken mothers, whatever, and use it like that, because if you buy chalk, it costs money. Or you can just use some of the plaster you've already got, put it in a bottle with a thing on it, and pack it in there, and that works a lot better. Okay. So this is why it's critical, as you're putting points together, to think about where points are going to be. What I'm probably going to do is I'm going to have a couple points here on the edge of the plinth where I already planned to. I'll have one up at the top. That's an original foundation point. Probably try to set it up at the full 8-inch depth that I'm planning it to be. And I'll have to put a fixture on the model and the plaster to equate to that. And then I'll probably just put foundation points along the wing, like I'd mentioned, and just carve from there, because all that's going to be shifted forward a little bit. So I want to have a good access to this side to do that. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and finish breaking this side off, tip to this red line, and I'm going to put a few stripes down here that are perfectly square down past my 8 inches, maybe 10 inches or whatever. Then I'll have places to put plumb blocks to cut a perfect edge, because we're going to be able to see this edge at the end, and it's got to be perfect. And we're going to give away all reference to this edge as we carve it, because we're going to take off a lot of stone in here. This is going to go down 8 inches and in 8 inches in some places, more or less, maybe on a bias, but this whole piece of stone's all going to come off. So now I want to talk a little bit about the model versus the job and how we arrange the placement of the model in the job, because we're in complete control. We can manipulate where the model is and where it isn't. We're going to take an inch off this joint, this face of the plinth, because of we had to repair the joint. So we're going to cut an inch off. I'm going to pretend these are 1 inch blocks. I think they're 3/4 inch, whatever, 7/8. They're not quite an inch. We're going to pretend these are an inch, just for quick reference. Now, if we have our foundation points right here, and this is an inch tall compared to the plaster model, okay? Because the plaster model is flush. It goes from the plinth right up to the front of her, and this is all flush. By raising these points 1 inch, effectively, by having this extra inch that we're going to take off the plinth, we're going to bring her forward, okay? In order to have her stay in the same place, with taking this off, we would have to add 2 inch blocks to the plaster here. And I'll put them on there in a second when we move over there so you can see it. In order to compensate for this extra stone that we're taking off here, these would go over on the bottom of her, and that would keep our points where they need to be in order to keep her flush with the face of the plinth. As it is, she's going to be brought forward about an inch. Does that make sense? By the same token, say for instance we wanted her to turn, to rotate her in order to make her look like she was turning towards the die. We could change the elevation of these points to do that, because it would either sink one side or raise one side. One side would sink and one side would raise in order to get her to turn. We could also take a measurement from here and a measurement from one of the other measurements from the top, and we could take a measurement from here, and when we apply the triangles to the compasses to the job, you can reverse them, and it will actually reverse the job. You could do a mirror image, and your point, instead of being here, will be over here. It's really cool stuff, and you got to set your model up right, and you're better off doing it from, you have to have a completed job. It's hard to do it from a scale law and go up. It's easier to do it from 1 to 1, but we did one of those. Andy did one of those beside me there at Celestial as well. But I want to move over and talk about the model a little bit and why this job is an important job, and one of the lessons I'm trying to convey through doing this specific job. But I'll take these over, but let's grab the camera and see if this will make sense. Okay, because we're going to take this top inch off, if we wanted this to be the face of the stone and the angel to be flush with that, we would have to have these blocks on here during the pointing to compensate for the stone that we're going to remove. Okay? Now, if we wanted it to make her rotate, we could do this. We could have one, well, it would actually be, one would be up and one would be down. This would be short, this would be long, and you can rotate her. A lot of this is really abstract to think about, and don't worry about the fancy stuff until you have done it a few times. And I don't mean doing it with a little, I mean doing it seriously. This is a lot like algebra. You've got to be able to just do what you're told, and it will start to make sense. It's an abstract thing, and you're not supposed to reevaluate it. You're supposed to do what you're told. Pointing with compasses, pointing in general, is meant to be a skill set that you can train somebody to do, and they don't have to have any artistic ability. They have to be obedient and diligent and accurate in their work. And so, but I think being able to do this as a sculptor is critical, because you get to create and do it, instead of saying, I'm incapable of doing that, I'm going to pass it off to somebody else. Now, by pointing this job and raising her, she's going to be forward, so that her toes should be pretty much flush with the front. And this drapery, and this, especially this drapery, will have the potential to cascade over the front. The function of this drapery out to the corner is to reinforce and strengthen this corner, because this is going to be fragile out here. So having the wing and this is all it means to limit how little exposure this corner gets to actually breaking. By having this back an inch and having her forward an inch, and probably pushing this die portion back half an inch, just to create a differential between the base and the die to help it stand out. There'll be an impact on this drapery. This drapery will probably be almost to the front corner. It should look really good. But there's some technical aspects of this that I want to bring up. I've mentioned the 8-inch die, the 8-inch portion behind her. That's really important, because I plan to cut this die 8 inches as well. And so you're going to have that dimension echoed between here and here. Okay, there's going to be some overlap behind her elbow where they're compressed, because this will be back 1.5 inches, so there's going to be a little bit of overlap there. It should be nominal as terms of noticing it, but that's a concession to doing this as a bas relief, so we can keep it within a budget range that's suitable for the patron. But this specific composition, with this arm stretched out onto another element, is really important to me. During my apprenticeship years, there were 2 jobs cut that I was exposed to, where they had a figure that had an arm like this reaching out to another component of the composition, and they could have turned out a lot better. Let's just put it that way. What happens is that as you carve this, any error that's in this project, when you enlarge it, you enlarge the error. And it's very easy to miss error. And so as you cut this, you have to think about, like I said, extra stone. I got 3 inches over on this far side of the stone, way over on the other side of the stone, so if I have to shift her over, I can. It would have been really tempting to lay this out into a pattern, and I could have a contour cut put on this and cut it out very accurately down here and cut this all out to start with at the manufacturer, so I don't have to take off a great big multi-hundred, 500-pound piece of stone there in the corner where all that stone's stacked up. But what happens is as you carve this, whether it's a function of the way you carve it and you carve her a little bit off, or you didn't measure her properly, but like this upper arm, this upper arm, this lower arm, this lower arm, this hand versus this hand, that arm can get really long. And when that arm gets long, this whole project is going to look like a failure. Because the only thing people are going to see, they're not going to see pretty feathers, they're not going to see pretty drapery, they're going to go, man, that's quite an arm on there. And I'm trying to do this as a challenge to myself and as a demonstration of how to do this and avoid that kind of a problem. So what we're going to do in terms of our order of operations is we're going to carve her in her entirety, everything probably except for the head, before we even begin to do more to the arm than just start to rough in this outer shoulder and this upper arm. Then we can cut the forearm, the hand, and the top of the die as we need it to make it fit. That will give us better agreement and a better result. And you've got to think about, because one of the jobs I talked about had some really ornate work over near the outstretched arm. And that ornate work can be a siren song, just like carving a head and a face on something at the very beginning, instead of after you got everything else placed, sorted, and resolved, and then you put the pretty face where you want it. People go for the gratification, and it can bite you. You also may have a technical issue where one of the jobs, they had to do some very serious work prior to producing the arm, and so it was measured and produced, and then when they got done, it just happened to be a little too deep, a little too long because of the way the model was, and there was no way to fix it because they had surrendered volume. They had cut stone off. And so I'm trying to incorporate those lessons from my apprenticeship into this project. So, but this is why it's critical to think about where your points are going to be. We're going to have points that are on this face right here. We're going to have points that are down below the top on the other end. And we're going to have points, most of it's going to shoot in from this side, because until we open up the other side, we're not going to have access to it. And then we can fine tune things as we get more stone removed. But it's really critical to remember how remember I told you this is the function of the relationship between three radii. You want to do your best to locate your points so that they overlap and they produce that perfect of an intersection. Because if you can do that, this will be a lot easier. Make yourself some circles, think about it, and try to understand this. And I wish it'd be easier if we could have an open discussion. But once this starts going, you just got to watch. This is what I'm going to do, and this is my goal. This is what I'm going to shoot for, is to try to have every point meet up that perfectly. Because as we carve this and we cut away stone, your points just kind of come together and it slowly closes up until they hit. And that's where we want to hit it. We're going to use plaster in a bottle to mark our stone, to swing our compasses, to strike it, to watch these lines move towards each other. And that's what we're going to do. Okay? I hope that helps. Like I said, now I'm going to keep working this stone off, get this side marked and straightened up to a few landmarks so I've got good reference before I surrender this, because once we start pointing, we're going to get rid of this whole top edge. And so we've got some bore and finishing work to do here to get this down where I need it to be. And we'll probably cut some flat spots down in here and go down part way into this side so we can mark our 8 inches from the top before we cut the top off. It'd be very easy, and have a few of those up the side, and then we'll be able to clean it all off and finish that edge probably after we turn it over, because I'll have to work the whole edge down part way, and then we'll turn it over and we'll start from the other side and we'll pull that middle of that side down later on in the job. Okay, just like we keep doing. I hope this helps, y'all. My name's Clint Button. I'm a granite sculptor here at Carolina Sculpture Studio, talking about compasses and triangles, errors and placement of your foundation points, and what we're going for. Thanks for coming in.